The meeting wasn't publicized. Governor Abbott flew in and out of the airport in Mesquite for a brief gathering between him and 41 African-American and Hispanic pastors. The governor has more than $40 million in the bank. Polls show him as the most popular politician in the state. So what did Abbott want to talk to them about? Ron Price is a community leader. He's a former Dallas ISD school board member, and he is the current CEO of the Genesis Research and Technology Group. You helped get everyone together.
Yes, sir.
It's good to see you again, man.
Good to see you as well. It's been a while. It was good to see you.
It has. This was a private meeting. The governor wanted in on this. What did he want?
Well, he's wanted to have a dialogue with African-American pastors, because most of the time the pastors are the individuals who are out with the people in the community every Sunday. Thousands of African-Americans are in front of their pastors. So he wanted to have a direct contact with some of these pastors, not the usual suspect, not the big names, but the folks who are really out there with the people in the trenches, and have an opportunity to talk to them and dialogue with them about state funding, the criminal justice system, the education system, and any question that the pastors had. It wasn't one of those situations where they had questions sent out. He opened the floor for any questions. Pastors had tons of questions for the governor.
This was a private meeting. We weren't allowed inside.
Sure.
What did the pastors tell him? What was the governor's response?
He had some excellent response. A lot of the pastors concentrated on the funding systems in the state of Texas. Education as well. Okay. Education was a major issue. I had some pointers about that as well. But criminal justice was really important. Pastor Donald Parrish from Truly Missionary Baptist Church in South Dallas really touched on the issue of reentry programs and the proper funding. There's a lot of people around this church getting out of jail, getting out of prison. They cannot find a job, and so subsequently they repeat offenders. So we really touched on that issue, and the governor touched on that issue as well. And what was really important was that the governor started giving out cell phone numbers to his staff. He didn't give office numbers out. He gave these 41 pastors personal cell numbers, and he told everyone, these people don't know I'm doing this, but I want you to call them direct, and they better answer your phone calls.
What's your reaction to the governor wanting this meeting?
I was happy about it. You know, he reached out, some of the folks on his staff reached out to me and said, we want to do something special, not just in Dallas, but they want to also do this in East Texas and Houston and San Antonio. And I told him I'd work with him to make that happen in those different cities. And he just wanted to reach out to the community and talk. And something I talked to the governor about, there's something we say in the United States right now that we have walls separating people. And I said, there's no such thing as walls. In some cases, walls are good because there's a monster on the other side. I said, our problem here in the United States is that we have soundproof glass. I can see that you're Republican. I can see you're a Democrat. I can see that you're white. I can see that you're Hispanic. I can see that you're Asian. I can see that you're Arab. But I can't hear you, and I can't talk to you. So we need to break through that soundproof glass. And this is the first step yesterday, to break through that glass so we can start dialoguing and talking to one another.
Was this a campaign stop, Ron?
No, it was just, he really wanted to just reach out to people. You can look at it as campaign, but he researched and found me through other people and said, I want to work with Ron. And I said, I want to work with you, Governor. Let's make it happen. Regardless if he's Republican or Democrat, we just want to do something special for the people in the state of Texas. You
talked about the wall, so does this mean you have more support for Governor Abbott, or these pastors have more support for him now?
Well, it's just a dialogue. It wasn't about trying to get a photo op. That's why we didn't have any cameras. That's why it wasn't no media blitz. We didn't sit down the press release.
Do you support him now?
Huh?
Do you support the governor?
I've always supported the governor. I support.
Would you vote for him?
Did I vote for him?
Would you vote for him?
Would I vote for him?
He's on the ballot in November.
You know, you have a special state senator who was here a few minutes ago, and you know, he knows where I live at. I got to be careful with my answer. But I do like the governor a great deal.
All right.
And Governor Abbott is a good friend, and I support the governor. I believe in what he's trying to do for all Texans, regardless of party. He's a good man, and he wants to do the right thing. When he expressed to me that he didn't want any media, that's in a clear message that he's serious about a dialogue with the African-American community.
Gotcha. Ron Price, it's good to see you again.
Good to see you as well.
Congratulations on the meeting.
Appreciate you.